Good evening and welcome to the first Creighton Distinguished Lecture Series for the year 23-24. I'm privileged to be with you today. I'm Wadal Rafai, Chair of Surgery at Creighton School of Medicine and Chair of Surgery at CHI Health. It is my distinct honor to welcome Dr. Stephen Charles Staines of the Leahy Clinic with us today to be the first Distinguished Lecture Series for this year. Welcome, Dr. Staines, to our city, to our program, to Creighton and CHI. I first invite Dr. Marcus Balter to give a reflection before we introduce our guest speaker.
Good evening. Happy to be here and excited to have Dr. Stain come speak with us and for us tonight. I was asked to give this reflection or a reflection, and it's always difficult to decide what to pick. So I went to my second favorite book. It's by David Mitchell, and it's called Cloud Atlas. I didn't know anything about it until one night I stumbled upon a movie that was the weirdest movie I ever had seen in my life. And I highly recommend it to anyone, Cloud Atlas. Of course, the movie was so strange that it made me read the book. And it was the first book that I can remember where I had to sit with my phone as a thesaurus and look words up as I read it. He was just so amazing in his word choices, and so it really moved me. And the book is really about how even the smallest things that we do or say can have profound influence on not only our lives but the lives of others. And so here's the reflection for tonight. Our lives are not our own. We are bound to others, from womb to tomb, past and present, and by each crime and every kindness, we birth our future.
Thank you, Dr. Balters. Thank you. I'm honored to introduce Dr. Stephen Stain, who's with us today. Dr. Stain was born in San Antonio, Texas, grew up in California and received his education in California, first at UCI and then LA County University of Southern California, now called the Keck School of Medicine. As part of his training, he received a hepatobiliary fellowship with the late Dr. Leslie Blumgard, who was considered one of the premier hepatobiliary surgeons, who went to lead hepatobiliary surgery at the Memorial Sloan Kettering New York Cancer Center in New York. Dr. Stain rose through the ranks to become the chair of surgery at Meharry in Tennessee, and then the chair of surgery in Albany. And then recently, he became the chair of surgery at the Leahy Clinic just outside Boston. He has a plethora of research publications in surgical education, health equity, and GI surgery. He has multi-million-dollar funding in these areas as well. Dr. Stain was a past president of the Society of Black Academic Surgeons, past president of the Western Surgical Association, past president of the Society of Surgery for the Alimentary Tract, and recently he became the president of the American Surgical Association, which is the oldest surgical organization in the United States. And we're privileged to have him with us today. My relationship goes with Dr. Stain since 2008, and thanking Dr. Selman Vickers, who was the chair of surgery at University of Minnesota, who invited me to be the faculty host. And I think that experience opened my mind to the importance of what a visiting professor can take your career and launch it in a positive direction. And since then, I kept that idea in mind, what it's important when you invite a visiting professor to have the network with as many people as possible so it has a positive impact. He was always there for me and to many others for no reason. You can call Dr. Stain 1 a.m. or 1 p.m. He's always there for you. And that's called leadership. Dr. Stain has the ability to take people from point A to B to C without them even noticing. So if he gives me advice, I may not like it. I notice a week later, I follow his advice without noticing. So that, in my opinion, that's leadership. I think Dr. Stain has, today I'm reflecting about the title of his talk, Dr. Stain and Creighton Surgery. And they're very interesting vignettes. Number one, Creighton Surgery has produced, I think, and correct me, Dr. Stain, one of the first African-American chair of surgery outside historically Black universities, Dr. Claude Organ, past president of SBAS. You're a past president of SBAS. You're the chair of surgery of the Leahy Clinic. This is where Dr. Fitzgibbons trained there. So Creighton, leadership as well. And then Dr. Tom DeMeester was a former chair here at Creighton and was with you and USC as well. So there is legacy for Creighton to produce leaders in surgery and be connected in the leadership of surgery as well. We're delighted and honored to have you today with us. Dr. Skene is going to talk to us today about why you should become a leader. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay? So when Dr. Alrifai asked me to give grand rounds last spring, I said yes, and then I backed out. And when he asked me to come the fall, he said, well, could you give a second talk? I said, no, it's a lot of work to give a second talk. And then he said it was the Dean's Distinguished Lecture Series. So I couldn't just give a canned talk. I had to do a new talk. And there's some of these things I've used in other talks, but this is my first time giving this talk. So, well, we'll see if it's any good. But I think that what he wanted, what he asked me to do was to give something that would be hopefully good for a broad group of people. And I say this as a person who does not read leadership books. But I figured, I can do anything. So I'll make up a leadership talk. And I want to, I have no disclosures. I'm a person who follows orders. So when Rhonda sent me all this mountain of things, I read the things that she actually sent me. And I would say that, this statement that is one of the principles of St. Ignatius is something which really means something to me. So I went to Catholic school. I left after first grade. So I went through first communion, but I didn't make it to confirmation. And my kids were confirmed in a Methodist church. So I'm not sure if I can still call myself a Catholic, but I think some of the things that are the principles of the the Jesuit order, they ask us to reach the highest ideals, and I think that's something which, no matter whether you're religious or not, I think we can all reach for high ideals. So I had my 40-year medical school reunion 2 weeks ago. As I said, I've been out of town for the last month all the time. So I went to Irvine, which is a relatively young medical school, young college. The college was actually founded in 1965. The medical school was an osteopathic school from the 1800s, but they switched to a medical school in the, I think, early 60s. But I got to see some of my classmates, and because this was the dean's lecture, I thought I would talk about medical school to start with. This was our cocktail party before our reunion. Interestingly, the class of '96, 6 African Americans, 10 Hispanics. Of the 6 African Americans, only 4 finished on time. 2 have died, and only 1 Latino, Steve Villarreal, showed up. We had a band in medical school. I didn't play in it. They played again. And the band is twice as big as it was when it was in medical school. I think people picked up new skills during medical school. So I thought I wanted to talk about my path to leadership and hopefully convince some of you that not only you can do it, but actually you should do it. And I think the benefits of being a leader come back to you when you have seen what you've been able to help people do it. I also want to acknowledge Gary Antone, who is here, who was a faculty member with me at USC in the 90s. He escaped LA before I did. And when I found I was coming, I said, I'd like to try and find Gary Antone, who I Googled him. He had just become a leader. State Commissioner of Health, and then I called your office. You're working at someplace else, but I'm really glad both of you were able to come. Talk tomorrow more about my relationship with Creighton and the people who have really influenced me to Creighton. But today I wanted to talk mostly about leadership. And I think, and again, I have not had much formal leadership training. I actually try and avoid most formal leadership training, and I'm not recommending that. But what I've done is I observe people. And I think that if I were to give you some advice, observe the people who you think are really good leaders. And for me, I've more importantly tried to not make the same mistakes of the people I have seen make. If you do just those two things, look at the people that are really good and don't do what the people who are really bad are. You'll be half the battle. So I took this picture, you can't see it, but very well, but I was in a conference, big auditorium talking about improvement, and that may be the worst slide I've ever seen. You couldn't read it. Even if you're in the front row, you couldn't read it. So I would just say that's an example of someone doing something really poorly. And, Al Yellen, who he remembers, who was a vascular surgeon, used to beat on me when I was a junior faculty. No more than 7 lines to a slide, Stephen. I still cheat, go 9, 10 sometimes. But every time I do a slide, I think about how many lines are on it. Sometimes you have to put more lines, but think about the people who you know who are effective communicators in presentations, and try and emulate what they do. So I'm an Irvine undergrad, Irvine Medical School. I am the first graduate, the best I can tell, from UC Irvine college or medical school to be a Department of Surgery chair. It's a young school. I'm the first graduate of LA County USC Medical Center to be a Department of Surgery chair. Do you think I'm really that special?
Yeah.
No. I didn't put a slide in because one of the things that if you look at my screensaver on my computer for the last 20 years, 25 years, it's been this picture of a field and the woods in the background, and that makes me think of the Robert Frost poem. You know what it is it? What is it?
I don't remember the title.
What's the
quintessential line is? I took the road.
I was 2 roads diverged upon a yellow wood, and I took the road less traveled. So I want to take you back to, I'm a senior in high school. It's graduation week from high school. My mother comes in, tells me she and my father are getting a divorce in June. I only applied to 3 colleges: Stanford, Pomona, and Fresno State. And only because Fresno State was 2 blocks from my house. Where did you think I went? I graduated from Irvine, but where do you think I went?
Fresno State.
I went to Fresno State. And I have friends who went to those fancy schools like Stanford or Harvard. But I really believe those 2 years at Fresno State, and there's 3 of us who did this. One is an internist. He went to UCLA. We could, in those days in California, if you went to a junior college and a state college 2 years, you automatically got into a UC relatively cheap. And I remembered that my father had given my sister a hard time about paying her tuition at Pomona. So I said, I'm going to go to school. I'm going to pay for it myself. And I think that decision to, which is maybe an unusual decision to go to Fresno State over Stanford. But as Robert Frost said, that has made all the difference. But let me go back. I'm going to talk about my time at USC. This was back at a time when you could get tenure. I got tenure in 1996. I gave it up for my current job. I had a job for life, but I gave it up. I'm going to talk about my time in the admissions committee at USC, why I went to Huntington Memorial, and my time at my last three jobs, Meharry, Albany Med, and Leahy Clinic. So his name is Ani Aquari, and I show that because he was friends with Mike Krzyzewski at Duke, and they had, after he died, they had an event for him to raise money. So I was finished residency in '88. I was going to go into private practice. I went to the American College of Surgeons, and we ended up. He was I think class of '71 at USC. I think he was class president, but I couldn't confirm that. And we ended up in his Hyatt Regency penthouse suite in the San Francisco Hyatt Regency drinking brandy. And he convinced me then that too much had been invested in me to go into private practice. And I felt, geez, I was going to go into private practice, be rich. And he said, literally, too much had been invested in me to go into private practice. So he was a USC graduate, trained at the Mayo Clinic. David Samuelson recruited him to leave the Mayo Clinic to go to Duke, where he became a full professor, ran an NIH-funded lab, and was a GI surgeon. You say too much had been invested in me. That next year, I went to the first Society of Black Academic Surgeons. There's Ani Aquari, sitting next to David Samuelson, Art Fleming from MLK Drew, James Thompson, Roland Hellens, Executive Director of the American College of Surgeons, Maurice Jakovich, Claude Organ, Asa Yancey, Eddie Hoover, Mitch Spellman, Eddie Cornwell, and there's me. So I went to that meeting, and I sort of saw what was possible for an African American. Probably more importantly was, this is my cohort of Reds. That's LA County back in the day. It's now been shuttered. They have a new building. These are the people who I trained with. Eddie Cornwell on the left was the chair of surgery at Howard. He was chief of trauma at Hopkins. Some would say he was the smartest resident of his generation. He was so good, they took 2 blacks the next year. Camila and myself. Ali Salim, next to me, is the chief of trauma at Brigham, full professor on the board of Mass General Brigham. Natalie Johnson was our director of the American Board of Surgery, and she married William Johnson, who's CEO of the largest insurance company, medical insurance company in Portland. These are the African Americans that have been trained at LA County up until about 2019. Greg Murray was a general surgeon in town who actually operated my father. George Jackson was a vascular surgeon, private practice. Charlie Hunter played football at Princeton. You see us, Leah Bacchus, the full professor now at Stanford, previous chair of the RRC for thoracic surgery. Tanya Clark, plastics at Stanford. I don't know what she did afterward. And David, Gabrielle David did the MIS at Temple.
You didn't put Terry Fitzgibbons in there.
He's tomorrow. So I'm going to start to talk about medical school. I don't know if the dean is here, but the deans of my life have had an influence on me. I had 5 deans, and I had lessons from each. I will go through those deans. Stanley Vandenort, he was a neurologist, and I was dean for about 13 years. As I said, in the 80s, we were relatively radical. So I tell you, there were 6 African Americans, 10 Hispanics. We decided we were going to take over the medical school. So we ran a slate of candidates, and we won the president, vice president, treasurer, secretary, and I was a treasurer. And we got to meet with the dean once a month for our last year of medical school. And I learned a lot from Dr. Vandenort about the pressures of being a dean, you know, like in many places, and maybe this place is different, but the money's in the hospital. It's not in the dean's office. But you have this desire to educate, to inspire, and that's what a dean does. But I learned from that time as a medical student that you can get things done with planning and with structure. And we would get together before, and we would go meet with the dean on a once-a-month meeting. We'd ask him for resources. It was hard to say no to 4 medical students, but that was my first impression. So, Dr. Rab, where is he? He's still here? So I made tenure at USC. Probably couldn't make it now, but I made it there. At USC, you had to have 30 papers. That's what the word, 30 papers. I had 29. But my letters, and these are people who I met. Sandy Levine, the chief of hematology. She's one of the original people who did AIDS research. Every Tuesday morning, she would give me, this is when they were first just deciding AIDS, 1980, 1989, something like that, 90. I would do axillary or cervical lymph node biopsy for lymph nodes, trying to try what AIDS was. People just show up. I'd have 4 or 5 patients. I would do lymph node biopsies for her. And when I got time to write my letter, she wrote me a letter. Marty Weiss, who the neurosurgery chair trained at LA County, he asked me about Dr. Weiss. I used to take care of patients for him in the ICU, and he wrote me a letter. And Leslie Bernstein, who was my wife's postdoc advisor for her PhD. Leslie was chair of the admissions committee before me. Does anyone know what the black tax is? What's the black tax?
A lot of committee work.
Yeah, so the black tax suggests that underrepresented minorities, and it could be women, it could be anybody, you get asked to serve over and over and over again on DEI causes. And all my mentors said, don't serve on the admissions committee, because it's just a time sink. I will add, I'm on the admissions committee now for UMass too. But I always said yes. Because of that, I got to meet so many important people. Steve Giannotti, another neurosurgeon. It was a time when, even though it took a lot of time, the contacts you got, and that's how I got to meet Dr. Ryan. So Dr. Ryan would say to the admissions committee every year, I'm going to judge you on the diversity of the class. He didn't say any more than that. That's what he said. I'm going to judge you on the class you accept. And that simple comment freed us up to do what we thought was best. We had knockdown, drag out fights. You know, there were the people who only wanted the Phi Beta Kappa people who were, you know, perfect MCAT, and the people who wanted more holistic approach. But he would judge us on what our class was like. I had a bit of a problem with Dr. Demeester at one point, my chair. And Dr. Ryan allowed me to keep my USC job, but also be the program director of a community hospital Huntington Hospital, which has since been bought, got bought by Cedars-Sinai now. But that I had the dean let me do that because I knew him. And then there was this manuscript controversy, which not many people know. This is one of the best papers I ever wrote. But I didn't write it. Sherry Red wrote it. She was my first fellow. She's now a full professor at Stanford. And it was basically being able to predict resectability of pancreatic cancer based on ultrasound. You do it with CT now. But it was a great paper. It was accepted in Pacific Coast Surgical. What author am I on that? I'm number 3. It was my fellow who wrote the paper. The senior author never worked on the paper. He asked if he could be the senior author. And he was a pancreatic surgeon, the group, I just put his name on, no big deal. But he went to Dr. DeMeester and said he had to be the senior author. You say, do what?
Seems like politics to me.
So what should I do? I went back to Dr. Ryan, the dean I knew. And I remember him, very, very looking out the window. And he said, Stephen, there's only 2 things a dean can do to a chair. I can ask him to apologize to you, or I can fire. I got my apology, but I had to leave the institution. I went to Meharry Medical College, which is a historically Black college in Nashville, and I had 2 deans. Didn't really get along with either of them, actually. It taught me a lot about myself. It actually, what I learned was that it was my fault how I was communicating. The president, though, was named John Maupin. He was a dentist, but he was president of a college, and I learned a lot about things from him. I was hired to be chair at Meharry after an interview with Claude Organ, who was on the board of Meharry. Lester Williams, who was a BU guy, Boston University guy, who worked at the private hospital in Nashville, and James O'Neill. He was a chair at Vanderbilt. And Dr. O'Neill said to me, matter of fact, okay, the next 3 years, I'll get you into the Society of University Surgeons, the Southern Surgical, and the American Surgical, just like that. And he was a person of enough influence to get that done. Except his mentor said, well, if he applies after 2 years in Nashville, he'll still be considered a Californian. So you got to wait a couple of years. The Southern is kind of funny. But what Dr. Maupin taught me was that I was acting like a bull in a china shop. I mean, I would walk into a meeting, and I still sometimes do. And because I know I'm right, I just think everyone has to agree with me. He taught me about committee dynamics. And this is something for those of you younger people should recognize. If you're going to win in a committee, you have talked to the important people ahead of time, so they are on your side when the controversial topic comes up. And the older people, you know who Bill Frist is. Bill Frist was a cardiac surgeon, senator from state of Tennessee, and Meharry wanted some money. Meharry needed some money for some educational thing. They wanted a couple $1 million. And how Congress works by the set-asides or pork, a senator will write one sentence in a bill, and it'll apply just to you. It'll apply to this $2 million is credited for, is designated for historically Black college in a southern state that has a population less than 7 million, It was so narrow, it had to be from a hair. Oh, by the way, Bill Frist's brother, Tommy Frist, runs a healthcare corporation of America. So they come from, they're gazillionaires. And he got a message from one of Bill Frist's aides to call a certain cell phone number. Don't have your secretary, don't have, do you call this number at this time? Secretary didn't answer, Bill Frist answered. And it was an insight into me how some things get done at a level. So since that time, if I give somebody my number, my cell phone, somebody who I really want to meet me, I don't give them my secretary's number. You want to talk to me, you're important enough, I will give you my number and I will answer the phone personally. My favorite dean was Vince Verdile. He retired when I got recruited to Albany. His family owned an Italian restaurant. My third visit, he cooked me dinner in front of me. For some of you who don't know me, I still have my critical care boards. So my super chief year, talking about your super chief year, I ran the ICU and I ran the breast service. That's what they needed that year. Terry did vascular surgery. So I actually recertified again last year, although I have not done critical care in 25 years. I was on the American Board of Surgery. Nobody else had their critical care board, so I wrote critical care exam questions for 8 years. So I know most of the principles. I still had to study for it. But my dean wanted to form a separate department of critical care. He came from Pittsburgh where they have a department of critical care. Because of my background, and mostly because I think it's important for general surgery residents to understand how to take care of critically ill patients, I wanted to keep that in the Department of Surgery. So after about a year and a half of discussion, I said, okay, but they could never recruit a person who could keep everybody happy, so it never happened. He taught me, well, he did, he could tell me no in a way that I could understand. And I learned about my priorities versus institutional priorities, something I still struggle with. Institution has to go this way, I want to go that way. We usually go this way, but I need to understand why we have to go that way. My once a month meeting with him was the best meeting of the month. So, why do you want to be a leader? Why should you aspire to leadership? Is it important to you personally? I used to think it was, but really in reality, I have lots of positions, but it's less important to me, but what I can do from a leadership position. And I think that's what I didn't realize. So you become a leader, then you can actually get some things done. It would be nice if it's a democracy, but it's not. I've learned, because I'm sort of an insider now, how some decisions get made in small rooms. And for that, I take you to Hamilton. Has anyone here not seen Hamilton?
Oh, boy.
You can get it on Apple TV now. You should go see it. Half of it centers around Albany. But if you pay attention to it, there is this theme about being in, it's a song too, being in the room where it happens. And these are the lyrics from the song. No one really knows how the game is played, the art of the trade, how the sausage gets made. We just assume that it happened, but no one else is in the room where it happened. So I spent 6 years, maybe 5 years, on the membership committee of the American Surgical Association. There are no transplant surgeons here, are there? There's this guy named Ben Cosby. Ben Cosby was head of transplant at Mass General. If your name came up and you were for membership and you were a transplant surgeon and Ben didn't know you, you just didn't get in. And what I learned, there were people in specialties, cardiac surgery, Dave Thornton, Craig's, when these guys spoke, everybody, because we didn't know people in those areas, but there are people who have so much influence that what their name, what their word says means a lot. And then you learn how to get the parties to yes. Eddie Cornwell, who was my senior resident, was on the nominating committee when Claude Organ became president of the American College of Surgeons. Courtney Townsend was the one who rammed that through. I mean, you know, and I'm a member. I'm president of American College, president of American Surgical, because, you know, Courtney Townsend at one point said, "Stephen, is your wife coming to the American Surgical this year?" I said, "Well, Dr. Townsend, if you want her to come, she'll come." And I thought I was going to be a committee person. He made me the recorder. And once you're an officer, the odds are 80, 90% you will become the president. That was Courtney Townsend. So if you're a surgeon, it starts first being involved in local and regional organizations, memberships on committees, become a committee chair. And for many of the organizations, nominations come from societies, especially societies or national organizations. And that comes often from the college. I was fortunate that I had positions in Pacific Coast Surgical, Western Surgical. I was a governor of SAGES. Carlos Pellegrini put me on a committee for SSAT, and I've been in these organizations. My first paper I wrote, remember, I was telling someone drive me over, I follow rules. You had to write a paper as a resident. I was the only one in my year who actually wrote a paper. Another paper was Dr. Yellen, the vascular paper, which was, I wrote the 2 vascular papers. And at that meeting, he took me to Pacific Coast Surgical to a NHL hockey game. I've never been to an NHL hockey game. But I like the academic life. You know, you go travel, you go to meetings, eat good food. So that got me wanting to stay in academics. And here's where I've been. I've been American Board of Surgery, after nominated by the Western Surgical, RRC nominated by the college, Regent nominated by I don't know who, governor and chair of the ACS Board of Governors. Back to Claude Organ, who was your chair of surgery here. He wrote this article, which no library I have subscribes to American Journal of Surgery, so I haven't been able to get a good copy, but this is a great paper. The interlocking of American surgery. He looked at 15 positions of what he called of influence: Board of Regents, American Board of Surgery, chair, vice chair, United Studies Section, other, and president of society, and editors of journals. 15 positions in over 40 years. Gave points based on your position. 460 surgeons served in these positions. Looked at where they went to medical school and where they did their residency. 8% of the surgeons collected almost a third of the points. And 7% of institutions accounted for nearly half the points. And they're the places you would imagine: Harvard, Hopkins, Penn, WashU, Northwestern. There's no Irvine there. But the people who trained me had come from those places and helped me get close to those organizations. And his point is that positions of influence involves element of peer identity and popularity, not by merit alone. And these interfaces during medical school and residency are part of the cause. Only a single woman, Olga Jonason, and 4 Blacks had ever been in a leadership role by 1985. But surgery as a discipline is not isolated and nor unaffected by societal trends, and these things are changing. How do you become a leader if you're not from one of these schools? Your CV, society involvement, because societies are nominated for leadership positions, and then your committee work. So, as president of the American Surgical Association, I got to make some nominations. For membership, probably the most important ones. One was my former fellow. One was an African-American chair. and one was a white male who had been very proactive in supporting diversity. Audit committee was your co-fellow, Jennifer Singh. She's we spoke 10, 15 years ago, and she's been to Kuwait as well. Honorary fellowship went to Steve Wexner. I need a basic science person for a committee. I'm not a basic science person, but I gave the board with this guy from UCLA who was very impressive, 2 R1s. When I nominated him, everybody knew him. But that interaction 10 years ago made me think of him. Other people you see, Bernard Lee was a plastic surgeon from VI Deaconess. I gave grand rounds at the VI Deaconess. He's kind of one of the promoters of the deep flap. I needed a plastic surgeon. I gave him Bernard Lee's name. I need a subcommittee person for quality and outcomes. I picked Dr. Al-Rafai because I knew him. Again, Society of Subspecialty Societies and National Organization. So as I told you, my challenges as a leader are because I usually think I'm right. In reality, I usually am right. My kids have a saying, you know, I could be wrong, but I really don't think that I'm wrong. So how do I manage the fact that I always think I'm right? And that some of that time is not speaking first. Let other people give opinions, because sometimes if I'm too dominant a voice, people won't be willing to speak. That's my advantage and my curse. As a chair, you need to recognize you are a middle manager. My dean even thinks he's a middle manager. Often you have to appreciate the fact that decisions are made above you, which is hard because you think you have all this power, but in reality, sometimes there are people whose voices count louder than yours. Pat Roberts, who preceded me as the chair, said the keys to success were listening, public speaking, and learning how to run a committee. So I have some lessons. First, you have to be very good at your job. Whatever that job is, you have to have people who support you. Courtney Townsend told me institutions have a certain identity. It's unlikely you're going to change that identity. If it's a clinical place, making it a research intensive institution takes a long time. Eric Nielsen, who was the chair of medicine at Vanderbilt, he's now dean at Northwestern, said he hired 2 types of faculty. The people who are successful in funding have to spend a lot of time at research. The problem is most people want to be a 50-50 person. And it's hard to ever be successful at research. This was Ron DiMatteo, who's chair at Penn, said, you should be doing research in an area you would be like to be invited to give grand rounds 15 years. Remember, you have 2 bosses. You're, as a chair, your dean, and your faculty. This is for you, Dr. Al-Rafai. You have 2 bosses. You go and piss one of them off. You can't piss them both off. You don't have the job.
And the residents.
And the residents. Now, as I said, I'm going to close with just some thoughts about as a leader. So again, this is one book that I bought. I was in an airport, and Chip Suba used to be the dean at Dartmouth, dean at Ohio State. And this is, if you get this book, it's sort of from a Christian perspective, but there's some great life lessons in this. If you can imagine, you come off a plane and you had to check a bag and you have to get your bag. There's only 7 or 8 chapters. I'll just go through those chapters with one slide from the chapter and tell you how it approached how I how it influenced how I approach things. So this guy spent, I don't know, 6 months flying over airports, like 80,000 miles. And what he observed was when you go to baggage claim, there are 2 different types of people. Are you the person that's up there looking for your bag? Or are you the person who stands back and waits? I used to be the person up there. And what changed my mind was taking trauma call. And I remember, those of you who still take trauma call, I'm much more effective standing back and watching the action than being there doing everything. So my approach has become, I can still do a lot of stuff. I can put a chest to. I could probably still do a, cryo. I can do a whole bunch of stuff. But my decision as a leader is to make a decision: are we going to the operating room or not? Am I going to see team or not? And for me, what I came to understand is that I make decisions if I just step back. I do not have to be there doing everything. I like to open up my mind to watch. So he said, I've got a great idea from now on. How about whenever you come to baggage claim, or think about it whenever you come to a difficult situation, take 3 steps back so that everybody else can see what's going on. And then if you see a bag coming toward you, get your own bag. If somebody needs help, maybe help them get their bag. True leadership connects people. And I think if you look at the people who are really, really successful in what they do, they are able to bring people together for a common goal, which is something that all of us, I know me, sometimes needs to work on, including everyone in the room in the discussion. It's very easy if you think you have the right answer, and you know you have the right answer, but you won't have everybody follow you unless you involve them in the decision making. Somehow it's not working. It's okay now. It's working. So you have to be available to people and not just be concerned about yourself. And what the chapter talks about, the ministry of availability, is recognize that there are lots of people around you who have things going on in their own lives. And, just because I'm tunnel vision to get my objective, I'm probably more effective if I just look around and see who else has needs. I'm actually pretty self-sufficient. My wife complains I don't need anybody. But they need me. My kids, my family, they need me engaged. I was talking to someone, a woman on trauma call today, about, all the things you have to do. You got kids, you got work, you want to write papers, and they're only 24 hours in a day. What do you do about that? I'll tell you what I did. I'm not good enough to do my job in 40 hours. I wish I was smarter. I wish I was faster. The best time of the day for me is from like 5:30 to 7 when no one's in the office bothering me. All that paperwork, I can't do it during the day. So probably 2 or 3 days a week, I stay till 7 o'clock at night and just catch up. Every weekend, I spend 4 hours a day at work. I cannot do all my paperwork during the week. I wish I could, but I can't. I have learned not to rush on things that are important. This is a quote in the book, but it's from Booker T. Washington, I'm going to talk about tomorrow. And he talks about somebody who's lost at sea and he's trying to get water. And everyone tells him, cast down your bucket where you are. He doesn't do it until the 4th time, and he's in the Amazon River. He puts down his bucket and there is fresh water. be aware of what's around you. And he ends by saying, those of my race, he was a slave, who depend upon their bettering their condition in a foreign land, who underestimate the importance of cultivating friendship with a southern white man who is their next door neighbor. Give yourself time to be creative. Because sometimes we are so wrapped up in the day-to-day, we don't take time to think. Most of the days when I used to have time to play golf, I played by myself. I could think. And I think sometimes you may be getting so busy, you don't have time by yourself to be creative. Change is not going to happen because somebody on high says it will. It'll happen one individual at a time, one small event, each of us deciding to choose a different way that we want to move together in this world. So I hope I've given you some things to think about. And I really would like to thank Creighton University, the Department of Surgery, for the opportunity to put this together for you. And I hopefully you have a thing or two that you remember. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Stain, for a wonderful talk. We'll open it for questions from the floor and on Zoom as well. Dr. Walters.
Well, thank you very much. That was great. I guess I would ask you, do you have advice for people who maybe aren't, it's not as easy for them to be outgoing? You're not from a top 10 school, you don't have all the connections, but you're not super outgoing. How do you do it? How do you force yourself to go that extra mile?
So those that know me, I am an introvert. I am an extrovert for my job. So that's just something that, my kids see me at a cocktail party, glad handing everybody. That's part of my job. I know that there are things that, me spending time with residents or with faculty, I can help them. You get better at it if you do it more. But I just sit home watching TV and the cable and just sitting there drinking a beer. That's part of my job. I think that, of course, organizations, I'm involved with another organization, Society of Asian Academic Surgeons. I'm helping them do some stuff. And positions don't come unless you put time on the committees. And a lot of people, I want to be on this, board. But you put time in committees, you get noticed. I mean, what I learned in some of these membership committee, people would complain that so-and-so didn't turn their reviews for journals in on time. You think that's pretty, minor thing, but no, people notice that. So I have two reviews due this week. Archives, Jam, if one's due on Monday, I will do it on the plane back. I have one from Annals. I've already read the paper. So I think being on time doing your committee work is a way for you to get noticed, and then do the things you like. I mean, I had spent some time in Tennessee. The chapter meeting from the American College of Surgeons in Tennessee, they actually serve moonshine, and we would go there and we'd drink moonshine every year, and it was with friends and things that I enjoy. So that's my advice.
Dr. Fitzgibbons.
Well, of course, I really enjoyed your talk. You've mentioned 3 people that have been absolutely critical to my career. Bart Organ recruited me here to Creighton in 1980. Olga Jonas and I worked on this grant, with this hernia grant, $6 million grant. And then Tom McMeister was so supportive. So it was just incredible that you mentioned all 3 of these people to me. One little thing about leadership, though, Bart Organ quit listening to the dean. He quit listening. He thought he was superior to the dean, and he wasn't. He just ignored what the dean told him to do, and he was gone. So I think leaders, you have to respect authority.
I definitely agree. I mean, and some of that is, you know, if your boss, whatever level, you know, somebody has to decide whether, you know, it's he or me, and often it's me that goes. Yes, sir.
Well, I thank you so much for not only a thought-provoking talk, but taking us through a very personal journey. And I could say that it's not only candid, but a lot of personal experience and feeling attached to that. So appreciate you sharing all of this. In my career, 15, 16 years at Creighton, I have served on numerous committees and boards, and currently as chief of staff. One thing which I always found the most difficult to overcome is dealing with a conflict of interest where two parties, two departments in an institution where both goals are noble. However, they're at competing interest. My department goal, as noble as somebody else's, may be at different ends. How do you overcome that? How do you still build a consensus and move towards a common goal?
So you're assuming that I know how to do that. I'm usually the one fighting, but I'll tell you something that we're going through right now. In Leahy, the ICUs are under surgical ICU, and the cardiac ICU, the general surgery ICU. Most of the providers in the cardiac ICU are anesthesia people, and I think the solution will not come from me keep pushing for what I want. It probably takes me at least understanding, but maybe not agreeing with anesthesia side. And I think a skillful leader will give us the space to do that. And I think the other part of that, you know, so you know, allowing people to disagree and not be disagreeable, because often it becomes personal. I'm guilty as the next person. But I think, you know, what I've seen great leaders do is set the ground rules. We can disagree, but it doesn't mean I think you're a bad person. And I think getting them to first have ground rules is something which allows people to understand the other person's point of view, even if they don't agree with it.
Dr. Antoine.
Thanks, Steve, for coming to our humble city of Omaha. The slide that I remember the most there is that you recruit two types of faculty. One that spend 80% of their time clinical, and the other type that spend 80% of their time in research. But we all know what you get rewarded for, and that is doing surgery. So how do the ones that spend 80% of their time in clinical practice get to be tenured, or is that even an issue anymore?
So that statement was made by an NIH-funded chair of medicine at Vanderbilt. I have worked at institutions that are primarily clinical places. The clinical activity is what pays for everything. I do not believe there will be many people you can afford who are 80% research. Mike Zinner, who was your boss at Brigham. At the Brigham, 90% of the people are clinicians. At University of Chicago, Jeff Matthews says, 90% of the people are clinicians. They may have a little bit of time for teaching and education, but pays for everything is clinical revenue. The challenge for a leader is how you garner some extra money and convince the clinicians in your field. You can't take money from the cardiac surgeons and give it to the breast surgeons. But I believe you can give money, have money in the cardiac group to support their own research. But in the reality, in most places, the 80-20 rule does not work unless your institution wants to be a top 10 NIH funded research place. And for those people, you may have 1 or 2 or 4 or 5 people like that. But you have to have others accept that some of their clinical revenue is going to support research. But I think, so I've been a chair for 24 years, 23 years. I've never had a chair's tax. I've never taken money from them because I don't think that that's the right thing for me to do. But in the divisions, they have used some of their money to support common goals. But that is institutional dependent. And I think it depends upon what you can inspire people together. What you remember the mug? Todd Reese used to have these mugs, had these 10 requirements of faculty, it became 20 requirements. You know the mug I'm talking about?
It's in my bedroom.
And it had anything that you had to do. So teaching medical students, attending grand rounds, all these things that are just part of the job. You don't get paid for those things. We were taught those just part of the job. And I think changing people's understanding that all the things they want to get paid for by teaching or coming to conference, I think that's, putting your bucket down where it is. That is if we're going to be an academic department, we all get together and do that stuff. And the benefit is, which you won't see for decades, the people you invested in turned out to be so much better than you. So you put that investment in people as residents or junior faculty, I got asked for Ali Salim, who's the chief of trauma at Brigham, he asked one person to speak for him at his internment as an endowed chair at Harvard. He picked me. Zara Cooper picked Mike Zinner. So, you get the payoff later in life, and the people you've invested in excel, and that's what makes it work.
Taylor?
Well, I apologize. I couldn't attend most of your presentation, but I will definitely watch it online. But I had an urgent patient issue. I think, I want to come back to conflict resolution as a leader. I think that's probably the most important one and the hardest to learn. And regardless if you are in academics or non-academics, my background is academics, but I think it happens everywhere. And it's a real tough one. And Dr. Bashir brought this up. So I could just tell you this where I struggled most. And I think especially physicians struggle because we don't learn that in medical school. And we don't learn that most of the time, now a little bit more than in the past, but we don't really learn that in the residence program. So I think conflict resolution. So how do you feel that compared to 25 years ago when we actually developed as leaders, do you feel that your faculty is more prepared for that on an everyday basis now than we were 25
Not at all. Not at all. But I think my job is to help them. And I'll tell you a story. There's a incredible clinician, Ed Lee, colorectal surgeon at Albany. I mean, he could do 14,000 hour views and nuts. I mean, he was incredibly efficient, could do everything. And he kept complaining how the clinic was running. Medical assistants, people answer all this stuff. You know what I did? I put him in charge of the clinic. And you see how hard it is to do administration. And the challenge for me was, I told you, I could do it better than anybody else. I could do it for him. but giving up things to let other people do so they can learn how hard it is to retain staff, how hard it is to get someone to answer the phones. So everyone thinks these things just happen. It's administrators who work on this. And so what I've tried to do when my ego will let me do it is give up some things and let them learn how to work on these projects. And then they realize, and that's a maturation, which I don't think it happens until you've been out in practice and you've seen how hard it is to get some of these things done. I think it comes with time.
I wish to invite Dr. Sabolos, Dr. Fitzgibbons. Give the time to, oh, wow, that's the. Oh, good. Dr. Stain, on behalf of Creighton University, both the Phoenix campus and the Omaha campus, Dr. Seaman, Dr. Savolas, and Dr. Fitzgibbons, and everyone here, thank you so much for your visit. This is an outstanding talk. On behalf of everyone, please accept this plaque.